Okay, Dennis Young here, Primitive Substance, Part 2 with Rhys Chatham, pioneer uh, musician, and we're going to go to Part 2 because there's so much in his life to go over. And Rhys, thanks for coming back.
It's great to be back, Dennis.
Great to see you again. So let's do more into, we left off, I think, with the kitchen, and we'll move on forward to what you did up to the current.
Yeah, exactly. So I was music director of the kitchen, which was a performance arts space in Soho when Soho was an area where all the artists were, uh, where people could do music and dance and performance and video. Uh, and it was a real center for avant-garde art. I had programmed a fella there who had just come in from the West Coast, a composer who had studied with Robert Ashley named Peter Gordon. And he had a group called the Love of Life Orchestra, and he invited me to play in it. Now, at the time, I was playing flute. I wasn't a guitarist. I was playing transverse flute. And so, and I was so excited to play in it because I never played in a rock band before. And there was the bass player from the Modern Lovers, Ernie Brooks, in it.
Oh, yeah.
David Van Tighem was on drums. Arthur Russell was playing cello. Scott Johnson was on electric guitar. And I was in there playing flute. And it was an amazing experience for me. We were rehearsing over at West Beth, which was an artist residence on the west side. Merce Cunningham had a studio on the top floor. And we were rehearsing in the basement. So Peter and I were on our way home. Both of us lived in the East Village at the time. And we're walking down Bleecker Street. And Peter posed a question to me. He said, "Rhys?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Have you ever in your entire life been to a rock concert?"
No.
And you remember? Yeah. And I said, "Well, no." And I'd never been, I was 25 years old, and I'd never been to a rock concert. I had rock records at home. I had the Velvet Underground, Grateful Dead, and Rolling Stones and this and that. But most of my record collection was contemporary music by people like Pierre Boulez, Edgar Varese, and Stockhausen, people like that. So Peter just laughed and he said, "Rhys, there's this new club that's opened up in the East Village. It's right near where we live. Why don't we, there's a very good group that's playing tonight. Why don't we go see it?"
Right.
And so that's exactly what we did. And it was May in 1976, and the group was the Ramones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and their record had just come out entitled, logically enough, The Ramones.
Yeah.
And it changed my life. This was my second epiphany. My first epiphany was hearing Terry Riley in 1968. This was my second epiphany. I had never seen anything like it. Here were these skinny guys playing electric instruments, doing music that I actually felt very close to. I was writing minimalist music very much in the vein of Lamont Young, with whom I studied and sang with in his group, The Theater of Eternal Music. Now, these guys, the Ramones, they were making music that was more complex than the music that I was making. They were using 3 chords, and I was only using 1 chord.
Oh, okay.
But I thought maybe I could work up to it, And no, but seriously, at the time, I was looking to find my own voice. And I looked at a composer like Steve Reich, who had borrowed from the Ghanaian percussion masters that he had studied with to make a piece called Drumming. I looked at Phil Glass, who worked with in Music in 12 Parts and Music in Changing Parts, worked with the jazz instrumentation, and borrowed ideas from the process art of artists like Richard Serra, and I looked at Lamont and also the trumpet player John Hassel, who had studied with an Indian musician named Pandit Pranath, and taken that music and putting it through a personal filter and coming through with a music that was uniquely their own. And I realized as a young composer, I had to do the same thing.
Mm.
But I was searching for a music that resonated with me. And I found it that
That's
night
something.
at CBGB's.
How about that?
Yeah. And so the very next day, I talked to my friend Scott Johnson, who was in Peter Gordon's The Love of Life Orchestra. And luckily for me, he had just gotten a new Stratocaster.
No, about
And
that.
he wasn't using his Telecaster, so he lent it to me, showed me how to play a couple of bar chords
Right.
and a basic blues scale, and that's how I got my start.
How about that? Wow. They had a great sound system there at CBGB's too. We played there once and it was fabulous.
Exactly. I can't remember. I don't even. Do you remember the name of the sound man? He was there for many years before he went to another
No,
place.
don't remember.
But the thing about CBGB's, let's be honest, Dennis, it was
Yes,
a dive,
of course.
and it was. But they had a great sound system, and the beautiful thing, it didn't matter if you were Patti Smith or a band that nobody had heard of. You got a good sound check
That's
when you
true.
played at
You're right.
CBGB's.
I forgot about that. You're right.
And one time I played, actually it was with Peter, and there were, I think, 10 people in the band. And after the concert, Peter was a little embarrassed, and he gave me my pay, which was $5.
Oh my God. Wow.
And he split what we got evenly. The pay there, let's put it this way, wasn't always the best, but what made it, what everyone wanted to play there, aside from it being CBGB's,
Right.
was that it was a terrific sound system,
Yes.
and you didn't get. You know how you play in a club and you get attitude from the sound
Oh
guys,
yeah. I hated
and
that.
yeah, and they
It was
acted
bad.
like who are you, and listen, we advise you to get your sound check done in 15
Oh
minutes,
yeah.
that
Of
kind of
course.
thing. And you never got that at CBGB's. And I arrived there, I think the first time I played, where I was relatively unknown in the punk scene. And the lighting guy said, don't worry, I'm going to give you a sunburn
That's funny.
while you're playing. You remember that guy who was sort of
Oh
like a
yeah.
Hells
I
Angels
did.
kind
That's
of guy?
right. Yep. That's funny. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was a
And
great
I love
time.
the graffiti also in the backstage where it was fantastic. Waiting to play and all this graffiti in the dressing room were just really fun.
And Dennis, let's not even talk about the bathroom.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, the bathroom was notorious for the graffiti, of course,
Right.
that was down there, but also the various shenanigans that would
Oh yeah.
happen. Not to mention the
Oh yeah.
smell.
Plenty of powder.
I remember it fondly. I remember those days fondly. But that isn't the first place I played.
Okay.
The first place. Well, I should back up a little bit.
Sure.
When I was in a band initially called the Gynecologists,
Okay.
and I played with, which consisted of the guitarist Nina Canal on guitar, Hetty Van Dyke on drums, and Robert Appleton on bass, I think. And we played in an art space. We played at St. Mark's Church in the context of the poetry project, because I had done readings there. I was part of the poetry scene in New York at that time. And I played with them, and I realized, I thought, I was a beginning guitarist, and saw the Ramones and I picked up a guitar, and then 4 months later I was playing a gig, right?
How about that?
And well, I mean, that's what everyone was doing back then.
Yeah, that's true.
And what I mean, what was so okay? I'll back up even further. That I had met Patti Smith on the St. Mark's poetry scene, and one time there was a reading going on, and I was going to read something, and I was sitting next to this person. It was Patti Smith, and she was not known as a rocker then,
Oh, okay.
but her performances were extremely dynamic. I don't know how many poetry readings you've been to, but a lot of times they can put you to sleep.
How about, I'm
And
sure.
but if Patty caught the audience going to sleep, she'd say, "Wake up!"
That's great.
And I mean, she even back then, she was a dynamic performer. Nobody fell asleep when Patty was reading. So we were all surprised when we heard that she and her friend Richard Howell were playing at this dive called CBGB's. And initially the performances that they did with television,
okay.
would 10 people would show up, same thing with the Talking Heads who were playing there. And but eventually it caught on, and it became a big thing, and you'd have front page coverage of Richard Hell on the front page of the Village Voice, and screaming about the quote unquote punk scene in New York, which consisted of groups like the Ramones,
Right.
Patti Smith, and television, the Talking Heads, and don't forget Blondie, and the list goes on and on.
Oh yeah.
So suddenly everybody and their mother wanted to play at CBGB's.
That's something.
And I didn't know how to get a gig there. And so I played in an art space, going back to what I was saying before, at St. Mark's Church on the Poetry Project, because of my connection there.
Right.
And I tried to play rock, and I thought playing rock would be easy because with my background as a classically trained musician,
right.
I thought, hey, I can count to 4. This is going to be a cinch. But I got up there and tried playing it, and I realized I didn't have the rhythms in my body that I was stiff in the way I was playing. And so I realized I needed to play in a group that wasn't my group, but was someone else's group, and learn how to play rock and roll by being in a rock and roll group. So I joined this group called Arsenal with Charlie Nash, who was the singer, and Miranda was a keyboard player, and I played guitar. And I spent almost a year with them, and be getting the rhythms of rock and roll into my body, as it were. And it was only then that I thought that I could maybe make a piece that would incorporate rock techniques with the minimalism that I'd done with Lamont Young. And what was very, very important to me, that I not be this colonist appropriating rock for my own perverse needs in minimalist music. Because sure, I could do that and play it at a place like the Kitchen. You could do anything you wanted at the Kitchen. And Lamont Young had done pieces called Let a Butterfly Out of a Jar. And he actually performed that at Yoko Ono's loft, and that was considered a piece of music. So if he could do that, I could. There was no question that I could play rock at the Kitchen, but could I play it in an authentic situation like CBGB's and not get lynched? That was the question that I was posing to myself. Well, the answer to that question was there was another club that started to work in tandem with CBGB's, and it was the new Max's Kansas City.
I know that.
Max's Kansas City on 14th Street in Union Square before was the hanging out ground of Andy Warhol. But the club had changed, and so upstairs they had a rock club and downstairs was a restaurant. And the first gig that I played in a rock context was with was at Max's Kansas City.
Oh, okay.
And so we were very excited about it. A composer named Jeffrey Lowen, who was in a group called Theoretical Girls, it was the one who got the gig.
Okay.
And so he invited me to play in it. And so in this piece that I made called Guitar Trio, I had Nina Canal, who I knew from The Gynecologist.
All right.
And I had Glenn Branca, who I knew from Theoretical Girls. And Wharton Tears was the drummer, who I also knew from Theoretical Girls. Theoretical Girls had asked me to play bass on a couple of their songs because they were trying they were trying to get a gig at the Kitchen.
How about that?
I gave them one, and I guess in recompense, they kindly invited me to play bass, and but I got to know those guys and invited Glenn to play with me on Guitar Trio. And so what I did was I gave Glenn a guitar that was tuned in 3 low E strings and 3 high D strings, not high D strings, 3 D strings tuned up to an E.
Okay.
And so it was this octave tuning to make it a kind of harmonic canon.
Oh, that sounds great.
Because the idea of Guitar Trio is like we're just playing E's, right?
Right.
You know, so it goes like, you know, da 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 da. But when you get a number of guitars playing that and improvising off of that rhythm, the harmonics build up, and above the fundamental frequency, you hear these choirs of angels singing.
Wow.
And so that's the idea of Guitar Trio. And you can easily find there's a short version of that originally that came out. I think the most recent version is from Table of the Elements Records, but it's about 8 minutes. You can get an idea of what it is on YouTube easily. But anyway, so I gave Glenn that guitar and Nina another guitar tuned in Justination. And we did that piece at Max's. And then my friend Glenn said, "Hey, wait a minute. I want to do a piece too."
How about that?
And he said that to Jeffrey. And so he one upped me. He on the piece did 6 electric guitars.
Oh my gosh.
Or 8 in special tunings, and did a very, very beautiful piece with that. And so the 3 of us did this initial gig. It was for all of us the first time that we played in a rock rather than an art context. And this scene at Max's Kansas City was incredible. And I just have to
imagine that.
Diverge to make a little parenthesis here. The first time I ever saw Teenage Jesus and the Jerks was at Max's Kansas City. I think I saw one of their original performance. This was Lydia Lunch's band with what was the name of the drummer? Oh, it escapes my mind. He had this mow haircut.
Oh yeah, I can't think of his name. I know
Bradley. His name was Bradley.
Oh right, okay.
And he had a rehearsal studio on Kenmare Street, I think it was called Nightmare Studios. And anyway,
it's a great name.
And James Chance was in the band, and he was playing saxophone. Now James Chance, I knew from the down East Village improv scene. He was very much a jazz player playing free jazz, but I believe this was his first foray, if that's the word, into rock, and he played in it beautifully. You know, Lydia was playing an out of tune guitar, and everybody played except James. Everybody played in the same rhythm. Da 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 da
Oh, that's
da
so,
da 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 da.
oh, that's
Bradley was
something.
going doing the same rhythm. It was really, really dumb.
How about that?
But it was so dumb. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
And over that, James was playing never ending, freely improvised
Oh my God.
melodies that were just amazing. It was very, very powerful.
I
And so
imagine.
Teenage Jesus got, I believe they got their start there. And then I think I saw one of the original performances of DNA,
Oh,
which
wow.
was
They were intense.
Arto Lindsay on
Oh,
12-string electric guitar going through an MXR graphic equalizer. And you had Robin. Oh, I have a. What was Robin's last name?
oh, I can't think of it now, but yeah, I know who you're talking about. They were
Yeah, Robin was on. Robin Crutchfield, of course. I mean,
right.
he's a buddy. You know, I had a. In French, we say un trou de mémoire. Uh, I, I had a senior moment, if you like.
That was a
And
special band.
but in any case, and Ikoe Murray was on drums. So you had now, Robin, please forgive me if I say this. I'm sure you won't get upset, but if you're
No.
listening to this, but you had this dorky looking guy like Arto with these huge glasses, and this guy that looked like Uncle Fester
That's
that
funny.
was Robin. And you have this little tiny itty bitty teeny weeny little Japanese woman
How
playing
about that?
drums. But oh, the way she played drums, I mean,
Hmm.
she hit those drums hard. And she was playing very, very sophisticated, what sounded like to me, free improvisation drum riffs. And the fact was that all of those people had been playing their instruments for 3 weeks.
Oh, that's amazing.
Because Arto,
That's
who
something.
was the band leader, specifically wanted people who had no idea how to play their instruments,
Oh, that's the
and
best.
to do something musical. And I think the person that we have to thank for this tendency in what later became called the no wave scene
Right.
was we have Patti Smith to thank for that,
Really?
because a lot of people, Patti was a poet. I mean, she wasn't a musician. I mean, she hung
Right.
out with musicians, but she wasn't particularly a musician. And so we saw her at CBGBs with television, who could play their instruments, except for Richard
Right.
when he was playing bass. But he would just play 2 notes, but the 2 notes he played were great.
Yeah, but
Uh, but she inspired a lot of people who thought, you know, maybe if Patty and Richard can do it, you know, we should thank Richard also.
right.
We can do it too,
Hmm.
because rock had become, by the mid 70s, extremely technical.
Yeah.
Like you would hear people like Frank Zappa play, not mentioned to Tony Iommi,
Right.
in Black Sabbath,
Yeah.
or,
Yes.
or those guys from AC/DC even.
Right.
Or you
The big,
listen to,
the
what
big
was the name of
prog
that?
scene too. Steve Howe. All those guys.
It was so technical.
Yeah.
We figured, we can't do that. It takes 10 years to learn how to do that. And at least, but then we saw Patty and Richard play, and we thought, well, maybe we can do something musical also. And then we saw Arto and his friends, Robin and Ikoe and Lydia Lunch with
Oh,
Bradley,
imagine.
and they proved it.
Hmm.
And so this for me was what inspired. And you had the musicians of Mars also. Don't forget Mars,
Right.
with Mark Cunningham, who was playing bass, and Nancy
Yeah, they were
Arlen on
amazing too.
drums, and what was her name? China Bug, I think. And all of those people came out of the visual art world or some other world, and
Right.
had learned how to play their instruments on the job,
I
if you'd
imagine.
like.
Hmm.
And it inspired all of this amazing music from people who might have been coming out of a visual art background
Hmm.
or some other kind of background, who loved music, and who were inspired to play something. And even if they couldn't play in a conventional manner, they managed to play something that was strong, and they managed to play something that was musical. Now, James Chance didn't stay with Lydia Lunch very long. I believe the story was Lydia decided that they didn't really need a saxophone player in the context of her band. And I mean, I don't believe it was any bad feelings or anything like
Okay.
that. But that was fine because James Chance started this band called the Contortions,
Right. They were amazing too.
which took the no wave scene, uh, um taking Tiger's Mountain by surprise. I mean, they, they it was really became a huge thing because James he was this little tiny guy,
How about that?
little tiny skinny guy, playing that alto saxophone, and he'd go out and beat up the audience. I mean,
Oh my
I'm
God.
sure he was
About that.
taking a cue from Iggy Pop, but whatever he did, whether he was or not, it worked. And he did, and that band did an amazing. They amalgamated uh,
I imagine.
uh, different tendencies in music in a way that was completely unpretentious, and I don't even think that they knew that they were doing it. But I mean, for me, coming, okay, you had James Nares, who was coming out of visual art, on keyboard, and he was playing tone clusters,
How about
okay,
that? Hmm.
on keyboard. You had Pat Place,
Oh
who
yeah.
was playing on the guitar, the kind of a slide sort of noise thing. And you had Adele Bertai also on guitar, mirroring her with a noisy kind of thing that she was doing.
Hmm.
Now, it's a classical composer, I'd analyze it and say,
Yeah.
oh, Henry Cowell used tone
There
clusters
you go.
before, but who cares?
Right.
Henry Cowell didn't do it in the context of somebody playing funk rhythms.
Right.
Do you remember the name of the drummer?
Of Henry Cow?
No, of Contortions.
Oh no, I can't
I'm
remember.
terribly sorry.
That's
But
okay.
he was a great, great drummer who also played in another band whose name escapes me. I'm terribly sorry if he's
That's
listening,
okay. No,
uh,
but
but we'll type it in.
that's okay.
But in any case, he had this wonderful uh, funk drummer and funk bass player, and he combined funk rhythms with noise in a way that had
Hmm.
never been done before.
Boy, I wish I saw
And
that.
yeah, and weren't you around, to see the Contortions at CBGB's? Or was
Uh,
that before your time?
before our time. Yeah, because we
Okay,
came around in 1980, 81.
okay, yeah, they had split up by then, I think,
Right.
or they had morphed into something else, James White and the Blacks, or
Right. I
something
remember
along that.
that.
But anyway, it was very exciting. James would go out and become, his shirt would be completely bloody. And
Wow.
as we discussed the last time, New York at the time had a very violent energy
Yes.
because of the crack problem that we had on not only on the scene, was pervasive in New York, and it was reflected in the first in punk music. There was a certain violence to it, and
Yeah.
certainly in the club and certainly in the no wave. But it was violence, but it was a very tribal kind
Mm.
of violence. And for me in this scene, by that time I was playing at CBGB's under my own name, and with a piece called, I think, Drastic Classicism, which was a piece that originally I'd worked with a choreographer named Cal Armitage.
Oh, okay.
And we had collaborated on this piece, which was, I believe, for 5 dancers and 5 musicians. And it was a very kind of a revelation on the dance scene to have
Mm.
music. The music of drastic classicism also used overtones as a primary melodic vocabulary,
Right.
but it was very, very loud and very, very aggressive.
Wow.
And
Must have heard
there
that.
was a question of whether it would be too powerful for dancers. But Carol and the dancers that she worked with, who largely came out of the Merce Cunningham Dance Company, were up to the challenge. And
Oh,
so
imagine. Mm.
we toured with it all over Europe and all over the States. And I also did versions of it just with the music, which he did at CBGB's. So it was a very, very exciting time, this time of the late
Oh, it
70s.
was. I imagine it
Uh,
was.
and then we get into the early 80s, your
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And by this time, now the thing about Max's and CBGB's is that, well, CBGB's really didn't pay very well. And
Mm.
because they'd have like maybe 4 bands on a night, and the money had to be split between all of them. And they took a cut, of course. And Max's paid better, but it wasn't much. Maybe it paid for the cab fare or the fee for getting all the instruments there. But then a fella came along on the rock scene named Jim Farrat.
Oh, yeah. I know
Remember
him.
Jim? Yeah, he's
Oh,
still
yeah.
around, going
He was
strong.
he was rough.
And well, he might have been rough, but he
Right.
instituted the idea of paying bands well
Oh, okay.
for for playing, because he had his initial club where he was programming was called Danceteria.
Oh, yeah. We played there.
And yeah, and uh, so instead of paying the bands a split, he gave them a guarantee. So bands would play there and get a guarantee of $500 or get a guarantee of $1,000. Jim was the first person that I knew of that instituted the idea of playing a rock group a set fee
I never
of
knew that.
$1,000
Wow.
for playing there. And his philosophy, he's coming from a kind of a very socialist kind of place. And his idea is that we're pulling it in hand over fist at the bar.
Hmm.
Why not share some of it with the poor musicians?
Right.
And so that was a very, very good thing that he did. And then after Danceteria, a number of other clubs came up. Well, there was a club called Interferon.
Oh, yeah. We played there
What
too.
was that? What was that club on 11th Street?
Was it the Underground? There was a club called the Underground he had also, and that didn't last too long.
And there was a
Hurrahs.
big club. There's a Palladium, of course, but there was another club. I can't remember the name of it. Adam and the Ants played there.
Okay.
But you probably played there also. And I played there with, I was on a program joint with Arto, Lindsay, and John Zorn was DJing. Elliot Sharp played. What was the name of that place? Can't remember. But clubs started springing up. And this was great because it gave, before the only 2 clubs you could play in a rock context were to speak of were Max's Kansas City and CBGB's.
Right.
But after Danceteria, many other clubs opened up, and we could actually do a little tour of New York. Or
That's true.
a band could play once every 6 weeks for exposure in a different club. And so this was a very good time for the rock scene.
But they
Well,
closed pretty rapidly, those clubs too. I mean, they didn't stay open long, some of them.
Well, when did Liquid start? You said you started coming in in 1981.
What 1980 we played at Haraz.
That's right. I forgot
1980
about Haraz.
No,
Haraz.
1981, February of 1981, we played. We played Tier 3 in 1980, and then we played. That was our first big gig, February.
Was that a Tier 3?
No, it was at Haraz. Well, Tier 3 was 1980, and then our second gig ever, I believe, was Haraz in February 1981.
Now, thank you for refreshing my memory, Dennis, because Jim had Haraz. That was where he got his start.
Right.
I don't know if it's what his start was actually, but the first time I became aware of Jim was at Haraz. How much did you get paid for that gig? Do you remember?
Don't even remember.
But you got paid, right?
We did, and we got paid in cash. All those places were cash.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it too.
It was great, but I don't remember at that time. Well, I don't think it was much, but we got paid.
Yeah. I don't know why I got paid so much. Maybe Jim liked me, but everybody got paid, and they got paid in cash, and it was a guarantee. Yeah, what they got, whether it was $250 or $1,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah, we actually opened up for Poly Rock. Remember them? Poly Rock.
I don't remember that. I remember the Screamers. Do you remember them?
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
Poly Rock. We opened up for.
Whatever happened to the Screamers?
I have no idea.
They were great. There were two keyboard players and a screamer.
That was really unusual. They were good.
That was I was very inspired.
There was so much, things happening. Everything was just people trying different music, and it was such a great time to be in New York.
It gave rock a shot in the arm.
It did.
We had a certain trajectory of the music from the late '60s. With the various hard rock groups. And culminating probably in the New York Dolls, and the first punk band, of course, was the Velvet Underground.
But, of course.
I never saw them live. Did you?
No, I didn't I wish I did.
Yeah, I wish I had also.
They were ahead of their time too, and that broke a lot of barriers, and all these other bands came about.
But the thing about the 80s was that there was a lot of new music, and mixing ideas coming out of, I believe, mixing ideas unconsciously and putting them into a rock context in a way that had never been done before. I was constantly hearing things that surprised me on the scene.
Well, what was surprising was the big dub influence. Jamaican dub music was mixed in. That was a big thing.
You mean with Bill Laswell and
Bill Laswell?
Like yeah, that was it. And then we had. I actually gave Fred Frith his first gig at the Kitchen. When he first came over from the States. And I was so embarrassed because we had Robert Fripp play before.
Oh, yeah.
And we gave Robert Fripp 100% of the door.
Oh, my gosh.
And I figured it's a state-supported place. Why shouldn't we? And he cleaned up.
I imagine he did.
And he said to his girlfriend at the time, "Oh, we can buy a new kitchen table with this." Jokingly, of course. And and so my director, the director of the kitchen, said she thought that Fred Fritz was the on the same financial level
Okay.
is Robert Fripp. And so she said, no, this time we're paying 50%.
How about that?
And he still made a lot of money, but I always felt bad about that.
Those
And
are famous. That was famous shows that he did. You know, everybody remembers his shows at the kitchen. And you think of Robert Fripp with the tapes and his loops, and that was all kind of
but
made
if Fred
that.
Frith is listening to this, I apologize to you for that from the bottom of my heart.
I don't know if he is, but who knows?
But going back to what you were saying about tape loops and stuff like that with Robert Fripp and Frippatronics, now that's a case in point that I wanted to address. Robert Fripp thought that he got the idea of using tape loops with two Revox tape recorders put 20 feet apart, thereby getting, playing into one Revox tape recorder, and then 10 seconds later, hearing it on the second Revox tape recorder, and then that going back into the original tape recorder, creating this phantom-like tape delay. He got the idea from Brian Eno, his buddy Brian Eno,
Right.
who did not share with him where he got the idea from.
How about that?
And of course, Brian got it from Terry Riley, because that's the technique that Terry pioneered with this piece from the late 60s called A Rainbow in Curved Air.
Oh, I have that record. That's
Yeah.
right.
And so the same technique. And Tony Conrad was the one who actually thought of it first, but Terry Riley was the one who popularized it and did something very, very beautiful with it that Tony didn't do. And so one could say, get all stuck up and say, well, Fripp got this thing that Fripp did was done before,
Right.
And but that's sort of beside the point. And because what's happening here is that, Terry Riley did it first and made a very, very beautiful music with it. And Fripp got a hold of the idea. It doesn't matter where he got it from, but he did his music with it.
Right.
And thank God he did, because
music,
it was very, very beautiful.
It is.
And so, in the framework of music, who had the idea of having an orchestra first?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, is an instrumentation or a technical technique. Nobody has a copyright on that, and you can take these things and do with it what you want and put it through your own filter.
Exactly.
And between me and my good friend Glenn Branca, may he rest in peace. A lot of people compare us because we work with exactly the same instrumentation. So the comparisons are inevitable, in the same way that comparisons were inevitable between Phil Glass and Steve Reich.
Right. Exactly.
The early music was similar, but you wouldn't mistake one for the other. As soon as you heard, that's Steve. As soon as you heard 10 seconds of Phil's music, oh, that's Phil. And the same thing is true with Glenn and me. We work with similar instrumentations. There's been talk in the press about who had what idea first. Is he copying me? Am I copying him? Or, what's going on here? And the answer to that question is, who cares?
Right.
I enjoy Glenn's music, and I think he has very good taste in instrumentation.
Right.
Since it's exactly the same as mine.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean that to sound acidic.
No, no, it's not.
No,
I
no,
didn't
no,
think
no,
so.
and vice versa. And
So we're almost an hour already. So
no,
we're getting there.
really?
We
Oh
got
my.
to do part 3 now.
Okay.
We
Well,
got to
what
do part 3.
do you have anything you'd like to close with, or anything you'd like
What
to?
I'd like to ask is, what effect boxes did you use back then? I mean, what kind of effects did you use to make your sound back then?
Okay, back then the only effect the only effect I used was an MXR 10 band equalizer.
Oh, okay.
And I got that idea from Arto Lindsay, who used that on his guitar also. But otherwise, Guitar Trio and Drastic Classicism, which were the pieces I was doing back then, were require a clean sound, as opposed to. So I would, Roland jazz chorus with no reverb would be good. Mason Boogie, maybe.
Got it.
Fender Twin would be fine. Marshall,
Okay.
no, doesn't work.
No, Marshall. Okay.
Marshall is great for if you're playing a Gibson guitar. My sounds work best with a Telecaster.
How about
Now,
that?
if we're going to get into my later work, I can go heavily into effects. Are we going to do a part 3 or not?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We got to do part 3. We haven't even gotten into your
Oh my goodness.
your 400 guitars shows and the Lincoln Center shows and your work in the 90s. I mean, you've had what a fantastic career, Rhys. Man, you've just been so informative. It's been a great learning process here. Thank you for doing this.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking shamelessly about myself for
Sure,
an
why
hour,
not?
and I'll look forward to doing it again.
Let's do part 3, and if we have to do part 4, who knows? But we'll keep going.
Okay, that sounds great,
Okay,
Dennis.
take care.
Thank you
I'll see you
very
soon.
much.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Have a good night. See ya.